All right. So I'm sure you've seen this before from all of our TASA presenters, but TASA, this is our mission. So if you're new to TASA, I definitely encourage you while I have you here to become a member of TASA and to support the important work that we do here in Texas. So TASA is our statewide advocacy organization that we address. We work to address and eliminate sexual violence, primarily through public policy, training, prevention work, and support to programs that serve survivors of sexual violence. And so if you are an advocate, if you are a student, if you are a survivor, if you're an institution, an organization, regardless of what you do, we really want to encourage you to become a member of TASA. So please join us. And again, for those who are members, thank you so much for your support. So you make this work possible. So that's a little bit about TASA. So we're going to jump in and talk a little bit about, first, I want to explore some of the outreach barriers, because we know that they exist, right? They're real. Like we just want to be real with, as someone who was responsible at a rape crisis center for community education, outreach, donations, recruiting volunteers, etc. Right? Like many of you, I wore many hats when I worked at a rape crisis center before I came to TASA, and so you know that the barriers exist, and specifically around this particular issue. And so I just wanted to bring those to the surface, and I want you to think about them. More importantly, I want to encourage you to explore these questions with your coworkers, your supervisors, your board of directors, and more importantly, your clients, especially your male clients who are accessing services at your center or your organization or your institution. And so I just want us to consider these questions as we move forward and talk specifically about how to use the stories from the Texas Men's Story Project. So the first question that I would ask you, and again, you can answer these questions, you can share your thoughts in the chat. Definitely want to encourage you to do that. A lot of folks still introducing themselves, and there are folks who are still joining us, which is amazing. So feel free to continue doing that. But ask yourself, what is the name and mission of your organization, right? And how do people know you, right? And we've been TASA from the very beginning. For almost 45 years, we have been known as TASA, or the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, right? So what I like about TASA, the name of TASA, right, is that it is inclusive, right? It's a gender neutral name of an organization that includes sexual assault. So people, when they come to TASA, they know that we are the Sexual Assault Coalition, that we represent all the rape crisis centers in the state of Texas, and that we support victims and survivors of sexual violence. So I got my start at the Austin Battered Women Center. And so for a long time, that's how we were known from the very beginning, almost, I think from the late 70s, probably was one of the first domestic violence programs here in Texas. And so when I first came to this work, I joined as a volunteer and then as a victim advocate at the Center for Battered Women. Over time, we merged with the Austin Rape Crisis Center, right? And we became Safe Place. So Safe Place was great because a safe place was inclusive of all genders, of all races, of all sexual orientations and gender identities, right? So there was a lot of conversation that happened about when we merged with the Austin Rape Crisis Center, what our name would be. And so I appreciated the opportunity to be a part of those conversations, right? As a former volunteer, as a staff person that also included our clients, both former clients and current clients, about what we should name the organization as we were merging with the Austin Rape Crisis Center. And so the Austin Rape Crisis Center had existed just as long as we had here in Austin. And I know for many of you around the state, people have known you by your name for a very long time. And so making that transition or changing the name of your organization can be difficult and also can be painful. You know, and there are costs associated, there are relationships associated with that. You know, there's rebranding of all of your materials, your website, you know, so it can be a tremendous lift for most of our organizations. So I want to acknowledge that that's not always realistic for all of us. But if you are moving into that process, it is definitely a question to ask yourself, does the name allow for survivors of all identities to see themselves in both the name and the mission of your organization, right? And so that's really something to consider, right? As we are promoting services, as we are encouraging survivors to come forward, both to access services, to report their abuse, etc. Like, does the name and mission of our organization invite specifically male survivors into that space, into that process? So these are just questions to consider. So are the male staff, the volunteers, the board members, etc., at your organization visible, right? Are they visible, or do they work primarily in an administrative role? Do they fix things in the office? Do they provide transportation? Do they volunteer at the thrift store? All of these, you know, like, are those male identified folks visible in your organization? So if I was to walk into your organization, when I see myself, right, would I see men that look like me, you know, in terms of my background, my age? Would I see men of different ages and races and sexual orientation, abilities, etc., right? So really consider the community that you're in, and does your organization represent that community, that region of the state? So that's really important. And just to take a look around at your volunteers and your staff, and are there male identified folks? So to be fully transparent, I was the first male identified person to work as a victim advocate at the shelter here in Austin. There were other men who worked for SAFE before me, so I was not the first male identified person to work at SAFE at the time. The only men that were at the shelter were men who fixed things, who, you know, delivered things. So that was also a transition for me, as well as for our clients, for the women and children who were living in the shelter, as well as the staff and the volunteers who have been exclusively female identified from the very beginning of the organization, right? Now, are there men who are involved in different capacity as donors and volunteers and board members? Yes, right? From the beginning of our movement, right? And it's important we just acknowledge that history. But as women-led organizations, as organizations that have served primarily girls and women, that has shifted over time, right? And I think part of, you know, that's why I'm here, right? Is because there was a courageous group of women, especially women of color, who created those opportunities for me to both volunteer and to eventually get hired at SAFE, right? And I think that's critical, just to acknowledge and to appreciate. So some things to think about. So a lot of folks sharing in the chat. For Tim is sharing a former organization I worked at, there was just me as a prevention educator and the male identified staff who worked part-time, maintenance work, out of staff of over 40, you know. Joey, my organization, has 2 male staff members. That's great. 1 advocate, myself, and the other is a crisis intervention specialist on our hotline, right? So I think these are really great examples. I appreciate both of you sharing that. To think about what's the role that the male identified folks serve within your organization. Are they visible to survivors in your community? Are they answering the hotline? Are they going to accompanying survivors at the hospital? Are they providing advocacy to survivors in different forms, right? Whether it's in person or virtually or online. So these are all things to consider, right? Like just questions to ask yourself, to ask your organization, to just consider as we move forward and think about engaging boys and men, because as a survivor, I'm more than likely to come back and access services if I see myself, if I feel welcomed, if I feel like there is representation, if I'm not the only, you know, for example, if I'm not the only person of color or man of color in the organization, as an example. So there's a lot of sort of considerations that we make that should be part of our outreach strategy to build that capacity, to be intentional about recruiting staff and volunteers, again, that represent our community. And our communities here in Texas are so diverse and beautiful, you know, that include different ethnic and religious groups and speak different languages. And so do we have that representation in our organization, within our leadership, on our board of directors, as our donors, volunteers, et cetera? So a challenge for all of us, right? It's work, and it's not something that happens overnight, because it didn't happen for SAFE here in Austin. They are still doing that work. And if you go to SAFE now, there are countless male volunteers, male staff, and it's amazing. And so that's possible regardless of the size of your organization, whether you're a small organization, a volunteer-led organization, an organization in a rural community, on the border, in a major city. It's possible, right? In terms of just beginning the process, beginning this conversation with yourself and with your coworkers and your leadership. What language does your organization use to describe male survivors of sexual violence, right? And that should be reflective of what the language that male survivors want to use. And so all we have to do is ask, right? Or listen. So that just requires for male survivors to describe their own abuse for themselves. And how do we incorporate that language so that that language is inclusive and speaks to all different forms of sexual violence, not just rape, right? We know that male survivors experience all types of sexual violence, and that's true for girls and women as well. But I think the language that we use to describe that needs to be really inclusive and broad, and again, reflective of the language that male survivors are using in your community, especially if it's in a different language, right? We talked about at one of the coffee chats about language and how critical language is, both culturally and is true for all kinds of communities. And so something to consider, the kind of language that we use, especially if you are a victim advocate yourself, a hotline advocate, you know, you accompany victims and survivors at the hospital, just to be really conscious and thoughtful about the language that you're using, and to reflect the language that the male survivor is using as they're accessing services. So then finally, does your organization's website, brochures, media messages, etc., include diverse images of boys and men, right? Again, so are we being reflective? So if I go and I follow you on Instagram, am I going to see myself? Am I going to see brown men and brown boys represented in your social media posts, in your images that you use on your website, in your materials and your publications? All of that makes it possible for me to be, again, to see myself and to know that it is safe, that ultimately we want to create safety and accessibility for all male identified survivors, right? So I want to be able to see myself even in the waiting room of your organization. So as I walk in, as I'm waiting to speak to somebody, are there posters on the wall? Are there brochures? Are there materials available that are for male identified folks, right? Do you have magazines that are primarily for girls and women? Are there publications, brochures? TASA has a really wonderful brochure for male survivors that I highly recommend. We just went through a process of revising that particular publication, and so it's available primarily as a digital brochure right now that your organization, of course, can print and make available to your clients. But it's a beautiful brochure that really speaks to the experiences and the needs of male survivors of sexual violence. So just as an example, right, of creating those kinds of publications, I highly recommend a magazine around healthy masculinity and pro-feminist men called Voicemail. And it's a fantastic publication that you can it's a quarterly print publication that you could have on in your waiting room for your not just your male clients, but also for any client, right? Because it speaks to so many people in terms of healthy and positive masculinity. And so as an example, right, of the type of materials, we're not talking about, Men's Health or other sort of publications. It's important to consider, I think, what kind of publications you're going to make available, because again, we tend to think mechanics, like these traditional male magazines, right? That might not be appropriate for all of our clients, especially children that might be in the waiting room. You're not going to put Maxim magazine. It's still a magazine. So just something to consider as about not just the waiting room, but your office, all the communal spaces within your organization, support group rooms, counseling rooms, etc. There are opportunities there to make incremental changes in terms of making it both accessible and comfortable for male survivors of sexual violence. So there's some. Tim shared. I remember a male survivor telling me that all but one of the brochures in the waiting room of one program included pictures of female identified survivors or showed men as menacing and perpetrators. Right. So these are all things to consider. Right. And it's okay to ask. Right. One of the things I encourage folks to do is to ask their male identified clients, conduct a focus group or survey. What has that experience been like for them, right? And compile that information, compile that data, and share it. Explore it with each other and as an organization, so that it informs in your work, and you begin to fill in those gaps, right? Because again, those are the incremental changes that we, as individual advocates, right? We might not be able to make those changes to policy and to the mission and to the name of the organization. We don't have that power or authority in our organization, but do you have an office space? Do you meet with clients in that space, right? Is it welcoming? Is it comfortable? Is it safe for your male identified clients? So incremental changes, that's what I want to encourage you to think about in terms of both your physical organization and space, but also your outreach. As we begin to think about how do we use these stories, right? Like what are the things that we can change? And if you make those changes, or if you need support making those changes, I want to encourage you to reach out to me. Again, you have my email address, and part of my job here at TASA is to provide training and technical assistance related to engaging men, period. right? Whether it's around the prevention of sexual violence or around male survivors of sexual violence. So I want to help you in your organization think critically about implementing these practices at your organization. I am here and ready to help and to support you in this work, and it's long-term work. So I don't expect anybody here to go into here. This is not going to happen overnight. So I just want to acknowledge that it is not easy, but there are incremental things that we can do at our organizations to make it possible for male survivors to access or to enhance the services that we provide. All right. Any questions or comments about these 4 things? Ooh, that's great. That's a great question. If you go to TASA.org, just so, and I imagine our monitors or Shelley or Madison can share the link to the actual brochure, that would be super awesome. So folks can see that and definitely share it. It's great because it's primarily, we're not currently making our physical brochures available to rape crisis centers right now, but it's perfect if you want to share on social media. It's a link to a PDF document, and again, you are more than welcome to print those at your office and to fold them, like old school. But I think it's important to know that a lot of male survivors are now beginning to access more information online. So that's why it's important to think about what information, what resources, are we sharing on social media and on our website related to male survivors of sexual violence, right? And so, because they are more likely, before they come in, before they call a hotline, before they access any services, they will more than likely explore your website, explore your social media platforms to determine whether it is safe or whether they are going to be welcome or whether the services are available to them as well. And so that's why it's so important for us to think, to just put to walk in a male survivor's shoes in terms of, if I was a male identified person, or if there's a male identified person in my life, what has that experience with me or the organization been like? And do you feel, is it accessible? And that's okay. It's going to be hard, right? Because it's going to be difficult to hear, no, it doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel accessible. But I think for transparency's sake, to be able to acknowledge that and to work to make your organization in terms of your outreach and your education more accessible to male survivors of sexual violence. Oh, thank you, Tim, for that update. So we're in the process of updating a lot of our brochures, and so hopefully they will be available in the next few months. And so yeah, look, just stay tuned, and highly encourage you to explore our website. Again, if you're a member of TASA, you have access to all of our materials at no cost to you and your organization. So an important resource, because a lot of our organizations, and I'm not encouraging you to create your own materials, your own posters. Now, if you have the resources and the funding to do that, I'd love to see that, right? The more examples of that we have, the better. So any support that we can offer, we have a whole communications department that can provide you with technical assistance support around developing messaging, content, materials, etc. So you are not alone. So you don't have to figure these things out. And there are a lot of folks here at TASA that can really provide sort of a wraparound technical assistance around development of both outreach messages and outreach materials. And so you are not alone. And if you create that content, we encourage you to share it with us so we can share it with other rape crisis centers and other organizations and institutions around the state of Texas and around the country, because unfortunately, a lot of this material, this content doesn't exist, right? And so we are in a really unique, there's a unique opportunity, a wonderful opportunity for all of us to begin to create that content and those materials Because again, they might not necessarily have been accessing our services before. The numbers, I would encourage you to take a hard look at the breakup, the makeup. That's a better of your clients in terms of their age, their gender identity, their sexual orientation, etc. Just to take a look at that and see whether, like, what those numbers have been, to be able to project and to hopefully improve over time, that we're capturing those and using those with the intention of, again, improving our services and our accessibility of those services, especially to male identified individuals. And I just want to acknowledge, when I say male identified, I'm talking about anyone who identifies with masculinity in any way, including trans boys and men. So when I say male identified folks, I just want to acknowledge that in terms of the language that I'm using, is just to be thoughtful about both the language our organization is using in outreach materials, so that all folks who identify with masculinity in some form feel welcome and accepted and at our organizations. So that's something to consider as well. So, and if you're looking for additional support around that, highly recommend exploring the work that Forge is doing. And I'm sure somebody can share the link to Forge, but they're doing tremendous work with trans and non-binary survivors of sexual violence. They provide training and technical assistance related to trans survivors, and they've developed some really great materials and resources. And so definitely encourage you to explore their website and follow them on social media. In addition, Michael, who is the executive director of Forge, participated in a series of podcasts specifically about male survivors of sexual violence and spoke to the experiences of trans and non-binary boys and men who have experienced sexual violence. So I encourage you to check out that podcast as well. So it's a two-parter. It is, you know, Michael did in the national, it's from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. It's called Podcast. Their podcast is called Podcast on the Go, and they're doing a wonderful series about male survivors that includes, I've done a couple in English, and they're going to be coming out a couple more in Spanish as well. So for our Spanish-speaking victim advocates about male survivors of sexual violence. So check those out if you haven't already. But Michael's podcast is phenomenal, his episode. So let's talk a little bit about the Texas Men's Story Project. Put the thumbs up emoji if this is the first time that you hear about in the chat. So thumbs up if this is the first time that you hear about the Texas Men's Story Project. It's a project that we organized here at TASA last summer. Around this time last year. So thumbs up if this is the first time you're hearing about the Texas Men's Story Project. If you've heard about this project, sweet. I'm curious how many folks are hearing about the Texas Men's Story Project for the first time. Oh, okay. People are using their reactions, so thank you, Madison. So that's good. So there are some folks who haven't heard about the Texas Men's Story Project. So the Texas Men's Story Project was a collaboration between TASA and the Men's Story Project. The Men's Story Project is a international project specifically that explores masculinities and invites male identified folks to share a story. And that story could be in any form. So it could be a spoken word piece, it could be a monologue, it could be a song, it could be a dance, it could be a digital art piece. It could be anything that really represents a story about their experience of masculinities. And so the Men's Story Project has been around for a long time, and it was founded by Dr. Josie Lurher. And so I encourage you to explore and to follow their work around the country and around the world in terms of inviting male-identified folks to share their story. And so these are our 10 storytellers. As you can see, they are so diverse, they are so beautiful, they are so brave. So we came together early last year. We partnered with the Men's Story Project with Dr. Josie Lurher, and to recruit and to invite male survivors to submit their stories. So we did an open invitation to submit your interest, your availability, and sort of your story concept. And so TASA, along with the Men's Story Project, promoted this project, invited male-identified folks from all over the state to submit their story. And so we ended up with 10 male-identified folks who we picked, right? There were a number of folks that submitted stories that we unfortunately through our process didn't invite into the project. And so I just want to acknowledge that there were a lot of brave male-identified folks who shared their story. And so yeah, thank you for that question, Sarah. Yeah, so if you look at the center at the bottom, Pete is a veteran himself, and so his story, specifically Pete's story, is about his experience in the military and boot camp, to be more specific. So yes, yeah, Pete Pedro is just a phenomenal storyteller. And so I highly recommend, if you're a veteran or if you are working with folks in the military, please share Pete's story with all the veterans and active service members in your life. It's just a powerful piece. So thank you for that question, sir. So these are our 10 storytellers that we ended up, that were part of this project. And so I, along with staff at TASA and Josie, worked with this group of folks to create these amazing stories that we have. So each of them, for example, AJ is a musician, so he's the second person on the top. AJ is a musician and wanted to do a song, wanted to write a song about his loss of experience. Him and his partner experienced a miscarriage, and so AJ wrote this beautiful piece about his experience of that loss, right? And so these were not just diverse men in terms of age and race and sexual orientation and background and experience. This was also a diverse range of experiences, of individuals who shared their stories. So me and Josie worked with these 10 men from Texas to share really candid personal stories that addressed really diverse topics pertaining to masculinity, right? To both men's health. So for example, Jetty's is about men's mental health, about depression and his experience with living with depression and his own struggles around mental health. It included stories of violence, surviving different forms of violence. Michael in the center, he's the third individual. I'm going to be focusing on Michael's story today. Michael is the only survivor, the only male survivor of sexual violence that was part of our group of 10. And so he shares this powerful spoken word piece about his experiences of childhood sexual abuse. Some men talked about their relationships with their partner. Some talked about what it meant to be queer or gay in their experience, their lived experience of or trans. Rocky, who's the fourth at the bottom, is a trans man. He just such a phenomenal individual. Where for folks that are interested, Rocky is going to be facilitating in August. We're having the topic for August is engaging trans boys and men, or like gay, bi, and trans boys and men. So Rocky's going to facilitate that discussion. And we've invited Rocky to be a part of that. And so Rocky's just a phenomenal individual. He is the executive director of the Texas Education Network of the Transgender Education Network of Texas, TENT. So Rocky shared his experience of transitioning and being a trans man as an example. So these stories are so unique and so beautiful on their own, right? They're just, issues of body image, journeys with growth and healing, intersections of race and other aspects of identity. I mean, it's just, they're just phenomenal, beautiful stories. Richard, who is on the bottom of your screen, the first one at the bottom of your screen, actually got his start with TASA as a volunteer. And so he's one of our, one of our founding members of TASA. So Richard Orton is an amazing, just an amazing individual who talks about his struggles, both around his anti-racist, undoing his own experiences of both racism and sexism, and such a powerful piece, right, from an elder. And so it's just a beautiful group of folks, right, who share really amazing, powerful stories. And so after several weeks of workshops, me and Josie worked with folks and other staff here at TASA, worked with them to create these stories, right, which became part of live production. So the way that the Men's Story Project is that the male identified folks who are part of this project go through a process of really engaging and understanding and exploring masculinities and exploring sexual violence prevention and exploring all of these issues that are part of these stories: fatherhood, mental health, sexual health, all the things that we explored as part of this project. We explored in several workshops. And so then those presenters shared their stories live in online events that we entitled the Texas Men's Story Project Telling Our Truths. So this happened over four separate events. And so we were very fortunate to be able to provide Spanish language interpretation as part of these events as well, thanks to the support of our funding. So we were able to provide these live productions, and that we did back in September of last year. And so just an amazing experience. So for the folks who are in today's workshop, if you had an opportunity to attend one of the live productions, share a heart emoji if you can. Just such a wonderful, powerful experience in terms of experiencing the stories live. And so we were really grateful to the storytellers for sharing their stories over these these dates in September with us and with the public, not just folks here in Texas, but around the country and around the world. And so these were all live productions that we did virtually because of COVID. So this was a project also, I should have said that TASA really organized this event as a virtual event at last year during COVID. We were not able to in an ideal world, we would have met in person with this group of male identified folks, but it also allowed us to recruit, to be intentional and to be able to recruit storytellers from all over the state. And so that's what made this project so unique and so amazing, is that we had individuals from all over the state, not just Austin, but from different parts of the state, from rural parts of the state, from border communities, and everything in between here in Texas. And so again, the presenters don't just represent diversity in terms of age, race, sexual orientation, identity, etc. They also represent geographically how diverse the state is. And so, yeah, folks were able to tune in for these live productions back in September. And so I wanted to share with you the flyer for those events, and for those folks that were able to join us for the live productions, thank you so much for being a part of those historical events. So out of these productions came one story from one male survivor of sexual violence. And like I said, Michael Gwen is an amazing individual. He, for those folks that don't know Michael Gwen is really active on social media. You should absolutely right now follow Michael Gwen on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. He is an amazing individual. He is an actor, a spoken word artist. He's all over. He travels all over the state and all over the country, hosting open mics, performing in commercials, like in movies. He's also a longtime social worker in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. He's originally from that area, and shared his story called "The Oldest Little Boy in the World." And so I want to share it with you. But before I do, I want to encourage you to take care of yourself. If you identify as a male survivor of sexual violence or childhood sexual abuse, I especially want to encourage you to take care of yourself. And so if that means walking away, putting this on mute, taking a break, taking a walk, drinking some water, reaching out to one of our advocates, now is the time to do that. And so at any point during Michael's story, I want to encourage you to take care of yourself. And so feel free to direct message, to private message Madison or Shelly if you need support at any time during today's workshop. So I'm going to give you a few seconds before I start it if you need to do that. And here we go.
Thank you for having me. This is a personal journey, one that paves the path to my own personal healing and ultimately reveals why I chose social work as a profession, or should I say why social work chose me. The title of my story is called "The Oldest Little Boy in the World." I've become an expert at fixing children who got left behind. Those who, like me, who once felt shiny and new, but are now bruised and blue. And I wondered, what good was my master's degree if I couldn't be the master of me? I remember it was a gloomy Sunday afternoon, a day that felt like one where ghosts would gather to mourn the murder of dreams, where a latchkey kid like me sat rocking back and forth, slowly melting like a polar ice cap, frantically praying for someone to unlock the mystery of my misery. When you're little, you're supposed to be excited for things like Christmas presents, Saturday morning cartoons, summertime, someone who loves you. And why didn't he love me? Protect me, instead of being a crooked shifting shadow with a soul as transparent as screen doors, wearing the stench of lust as loud as May blossoms. And there, aren't enough blankets in the world to hide under when you live with a monster. He will find you. And no matter how creative I thought I was in this twisted game of hide and seek, he would always find me. Growing up with a damaged dignity is easy when you spent your childhood on your knees. And you'd think with my age and education, I would have worked it out a little sooner. But how in the hell could my spirit rise when my head had been trained to stay down? He must have loved me, right? Right? So now I write like some literary savant, scratching out words as loud as school bus brakes. I write because the memories that could have been will never be. I used to wonder, how could I truly love someone when all I did was live me? And then I realized that it was not my fault. That because of him, I became a verb in past tense, an unwilling subject in sentences that kept on running and running and running. He crushed my innocence, killed any sense of normalcy. His kiss was fist, was push, was punch, was choke, and I was all that was. And now, there I sat, wearing that shame, living that lie, an emotional misfit asking, why? My voice became as raspy as rusty trumpets. Gray hair pushed through my charred skin to expose this old man. There I was, a boy who knew all too well traveling hands with no passport. I used to act all tough, be angry, get into fights over the smallest things. I stopped crying. Not because I was trying to be all macho, but because I had already run out of tears. I used to pray for someone to come show me what love was because I was tired of pretending I knew. And how could I, when my only lessons in manhood was swallowing his pride? Do you know what it felt like to live in your own private hell? I did. And I just wanted to sleep in peace and wake up happy again. Was that asking too much? I used to believe that it was, but now I know that it wasn't. I realized that I deserved love, support, and grace, that inside me could become a safe space, that I could rely on my own transparency and trust in inner honesty that set me free, that I deserve self-respect and all it brings. I deserve every damn thing. And after all that pain, all that I've been through, after all those things that I pushed way down, I know now that I am more than a 9-year-old burn victim who survived being stabbed, hit by drunk drivers, shot twice, and abused. I am more than that. I am more. I am a father, a brother, a mentor, a veteran, a loving, caring human being. Hell yeah, I got secrets. And like so many others, I've been through some shit. I have scars on my soul and I will never be the same. But I'm making peace with those parts too. I'm beginning to see me where I'm supposed to be. And that there's a reason why I'm still here. A reason why I chose a profession that allows me to use all those experiences and every resource at my disposal to help teens and young adults to never feel worthless or thrown away like I did, so that they are no longer bruised and blue. And somewhere between then and now, I learned a new skill: survival. And now I can finally master and be the master of me. I'm so proud to be on track to reclaiming my own dignity and taking back my life. By revisiting the parts deep down inside, I am learning to feel alive again, to reclaim my pride, my health, my whole damn self. So that something as simple as keeping a job, protecting my kids, providing for my family, and loving someone special ceases being a post-traumatic struggle. No more. This pain no longer isolates me because self-love insulates me. My head is raised high now. High because I continue on my journey to understanding that acceptance of my past can bring a healing that creates healthy relationships for my future. Damn. It's going to feel so good to finally feel free. This rediscovery is teaching me to accept the support that I needed to recover from my trauma and to break the cycle of silence that leads to a toxic masculinity. I've used everything I know to get back here. Things like prayer, creative writing, poetry slams, acting, aromatherapy, music, meditation, keto, even yoga. But mainly, I sought out supportive groups like the Men's Story Project, which over the last few months has provided me with a tremendous opportunity to be part of a movement of men who share emotional journeys via this positive platform of collective self-expressions. And these invaluable, just truly invaluable connections have helped me to begin to recognize and respect myself and others in a way I never thought possible. I'm beginning to know who I am now. I'm a work in progress, a man whose heart is only just beginning to embrace his past and whose soul is now brimming with the possibility of a brand new joy and inner peace. I'm a survivor who is learning to see past his own experiences and realize the fact is I don't always have to try to fix everything. The designation of my manhood is no longer dependent upon social expectations. Basically, this newfound comfortability with my enemy is creating a vulnerability that evolves my masculinity. I said, this newfound comfortability with my inner me is creating a vulnerability that evolves my masculinity. You see, my story has just begun. And I feel confident that one day these breadcrumbs of wisdom, hope, self-reflection will eventually lead me to the best Michael Gwen I can be. My life is on the right track now. And I like where it's going. Because it's a life where I know that I no longer have to be the oldest little boy in the world. Thank you, Men's Story Project.
I just want you to just take a minute and just breathe. So Beth shared in the chat, wow, powerful, so emotional right now. Beth is pregnant with her son, who's due August the 15th. And I want so much for this world to be a better place for him. As we all do, Beth, thank you so much for sharing that. And please continue staying, hope that you continue to have a healthy and happy pregnancy. Madison shared, I get chills every time. It's an honor to listen, right? And this is just one of 10 stories. Michael's is just so powerful. Erica shared that moved me. Thank you for sharing. The raw emotion delivered is outstanding. Raquel shared powerful video. Roger shared impactful. So these are all words that we heard from folks who witnessed, who witnessed the production of this live and who heard Michael's story for the first time. I hadn't even heard it. And I had been working with Michael over many weeks, and they had been working with each other to create their stories, to refine their story, whatever that was. And so during the live production was the first time that I heard this. I had a sense of what they were doing in terms of what kind of piece they were doing, whether it was a song or a monologue. I knew that Michael was going to do a spoken word piece. As a writer and a poet himself, I just knew it was going to be so powerful, and it just was. And folks shared have the same reaction to during live production as well as to the recording. So the one thing I want to ask you to do right now, right, because we talked about incremental outreach, is I want you to share Michael's story on your personal social media platforms. So it's on, we shared these stories, we shared all of the stories from the Texas Men's Story Project on our Instagram page. And so you can share, if you're on Instagram, you can share the recording from there with your family members, your friends, your followers, just to begin to, again, our intention for creating this project was to create tools for rape crisis centers around the state and around the country to be able to engagement on a range of issues, including male survivors of sexual violence, right? To be able to use Michael's story. Michael knew that his story would be, his intention for sharing the story was so that other male survivors like him, especially men of color, would come forward and share their own experiences, their own stories of sexual violence, especially childhood sexual abuse. Michael has inspired countless individuals with his spoken word, his poetry, his acting, his other work. But this piece will live on, but it will, people will have that same reaction. So I want to encourage you on the YouTube channel to make comments, to share it, to like it, to subscribe, more importantly, to our YouTube channel. It's so important to help us get the word out of not just Michael's story, but the other stories that are part of this project that are just as powerful, just as beautiful, just as moving, and just as impactful. But I think for the purposes of this workshop, this is the story that you can use as an individual, as an advocate, as a volunteer, whatever your role is at your organization or institution, is just sharing this on your organization's social media platform. And so I'm going to talk about ways that you can use Michael's video, Michael's story, because it is so unique of the 10. Again, he is the only male survivor. He's not the only male survivor, but the only male survivor of childhood sexual abuse that shares their story. So I think it's important to acknowledge that a lot of men that were part of that group experienced different forms of violence and abuse over their lifetime and shared some of that in their stories. But Michael is unique because, again, he shared his experience of childhood sexual abuse with us. So any questions or comments, folks? Judy shared, wow. Yeah, I mean, it's really powerful. So I hope all of you have an opportunity to watch the other 9 stories, and I want to encourage you to continue to share your reactions to Michael's story. Oops. So in the chat, while we're kind of thinking about Michael's story, so in the chat, if you would, what's your immediate reaction, right? Like, I think you did that powerful video, impactful, wow. Is there anything in particular that stood out from Michael's story? Like anything that you really, that caught your attention, just so that most stories are between 5 to 10 minutes long, right? And so we wanted to give each of the storytellers the time and the space to share and to present their story. And so Michael's is on the long side, the long end of things, but I think that's important because I think he really walks through his lived experience. But is there anything that stood out to you, and why? It just stuck with you. And again, all of us process in different ways, and may take a little bit more time. That's okay. So Erica shared the raw emotion delivered with real language in such a creative, healing way. It forced me to reflect on my own personal experience. I loved it. Thank you, Erica. Caseworker number 3, whoever you are, thank you for sharing. Wow, powerful, right? So I just want you to just reflect and to think about and to watch it again, if you can, on your own time. Yeah, please, Madison.
Emiliano, I have a couple folks who are messaging me privately. I mean, I think it's a little bit of, might be just like a accident. So I don't want to read just in case it is public, but I just wanted to, because I can't copy and paste. And I also just want to honor just in case if it was not meant to be a private message to me, since they're sharing feedback from the video. I just wanted to encourage folks to, you know, make sure that if they want everyone to see it, they put that in the chat. But if not, it is an honor to read people's words. I just want to put that out there, but definitely wanted to make sure that folks saw that they were messaging me privately.
Thank you, Madison. Sarah shared it was more of what I sensed, the layers of pain that he has processed. Yeah, Michael has done a lot of work. His work through his experiences and didn't work through them. It's important for us to acknowledge he didn't work through them through a rape crisis center, right? So he's done that work through therapy and other forms of therapy, so that he acknowledges in his story. But I think Foxley shared the similarity with his story and the one of Tan, who just contacted me for coaching related to his childhood abuse. It gave me hope that early intervention will help him not feel the loneliness, the aloneness felt by Michael. Thank you. Yeah, I think, you know, the whole point of this project is so that male identified folks can see and hear the stories and know that they're not alone, not just around experiences of sexual violence or sexual abuse, but all these around fatherhood, around mental health, around sexual health, around relationships, around their own experiences of violence or masculinity. Yeah, that it is okay for us to be courageous and to share our stories, and how important and profound that can be. Tim shared that despite sharing the pain, it's a story of thriving, of resilience, of survivor strength, rather than what we often see with survivor stories where survivors are shown as broken or only victim. Foxy clarified in terms of they were talking about a teen client of theirs. So yeah, really powerful. Thank you all so much for sharing. I really appreciate that. And then I want us to think, just to take a moment and to make a note to yourself of how you could envision using Michael's story. So we know that Michael's story is part of this collection of the Texas Men's Story Project. How can I use Michael's story? And we talked about just one way that we could do that, and you know, ourselves as individuals and as organizations. But I want to share with you really quickly, because I know time is running out, so just to provide you with some additional examples of how Michael's story can be used specifically. So using stories that heal, specifically Michael's story and the other stories that are part of the project. Share the Texas Men's Story Project stories across your social media platforms, like we discussed. If you haven't already, please share Michael's story, but please share the entire playlist. We've created a playlist on YouTube where you can access all of the stories. And so it's really easy to copy and paste that link into your social media platforms and to share that so people can watch the entire playlist of stories. And it's also, you can highlight those individual stories. So Shelly shared the link to Michael's story. So again, so you can do it both ways. You can share the whole playlist, or you can share the individual stories, whether it's, for example, Mental Health Awareness Month, or whether you can share Michael's story during Sexual Assault Awareness Month in April, right? So as you're planning and thinking about your outreach, you're planning your outreach messages, you're developing, you know, messages for social media, how can you incorporate these stories throughout the year across platforms that again are going to engage different types of male identified folks, right? So men with different experiences, different backgrounds. So we want to encourage you to think critically about how those stories can be used to reach men in your community and to engage with them in a conversation. So one of the things that we want to see and that we don't currently have plans for, but we'd love to encourage you to consider creating, is guiding questions, activities around Michael's story. So I shared with you some just initial guiding questions to think about Michael's story, but what are some additional questions? What are some activities that you can create around Michael's story that you can use in a community setting or online with a group of boys or men? And really think critically, is there a way to create these kinds of conversations, especially with boys and men of color? Right? Is there a way to engage predominantly male audiences of law enforcement or professionals, coaches, etc.? Like, think about all the different ways and all the different things that you can do with Michael's story. And we want to encourage you to share that with us as you're developing. We know that all of you are creative in your own unique way. And so please feel free to do that with Michael's story. Invite Michael to share his story with you and to share his spoken word piece. Not just the oldest little boy in the world. He also did this really unique separate piece for Men Healing's Story Project. So Men Healing is a national organization that serves male survivors of sexual violence. And they organized their own, they partnered with the Men's Story Project to create a collection of stories exclusively from male survivors of sexual violence. And Michael was part of that project as well and shares a completely different story. So I highly recommend you checking that out. Ashlyn shared, I plan on using these videos when going to provide in-service training for high school teachers before school begins this year. Fantastic. Yeah, I definitely encourage you to take a look at all of them and, you know, incorporate them. And that's actually the next, that's one of these bullets here. You can host an online party, you know, a watch party on Facebook, right? And just as a way to engage your community online, to begin to have conversations. Thank you, Beth. Shelly will share the link with you in the chat. Yeah, please watch all the stories and again, share those just for transparency's sake. I'm on the board of Men Healing, and so I just want you to know that, but that project is really phenomenal and their stories are so powerful. They're primarily monologues. Michael's is another spoken word piece as part of that project, but they're just as amazing and just as important. So please share those with folks as well. And then finally, incorporate them like Beth, like Ashlyn is going to do into your trainings and presentations. Are there ways that you can incorporate if you're trying to engage a group of fathers? There's a wonderful story that's part of the project about a father of a trans, about their trans son and their transition, right? So there's wonderful stories that you will, like in the entire playlist, you will find yourself. You will find the boys and men that you love in their stories. And we encourage you to especially share them with the boys and men in your life, the boys and men that you love, that you work with, that you worship with, that you go to school with, right? Like these stories are so important to share. And so these are just some ideas, some initial ideas about how these stories could be used, about how Michael's story in particular could be used. If you do something creative, something out of the box with Michael's story, please share that with me. I'd love to hear that. And I'd love to be able to share that in future as we continue to develop and to talk about this project and talk about Michael's story in particular. But please reach out to Michael and let him know how his story impacted him. Leave a comment on his story on YouTube, or just reach out to him on social media and invite him to share his story. So if you're looking for a Texas-based speaker to share their story, they're happy to do that. And so definitely encourage you to reach out to Michael. I noticed earlier, Madison shared all his contact information, all his links to all his socials. So please reach out to Michael and please tell him that I sent you. I love Michael dearly, and he is just a phenomenal person. So I need to wrap up. So I apologize, it's going to go real quickly. So stay awake, folks. Here we go. So I'm going to just share some engaging male survivor resources specifically for you. If you are a victim advocate, an organization, institution, these are all for you. Our sister coalition in Washington State has this wonderful publication called Connections. Just Google it. It's about male survivors of sexual violence. It's available as a digital magazine, so definitely worth your time. Boys and Men Healing is a documentary about male survivors of childhood sexual abuse. If you haven't seen it, it's available as a digital copy, as a DVD. For those folks that still have a DVD player, you can order a DVD from Boys and Men Healing. The Voiceless is another documentary that profiles male survivors of sexual violence. Now, the men who are featured in this documentary are a little bit younger. So if you're looking primarily for like male survivors who are college age or young adults, this film is perfect for you and was created by a survivor of sexual violence herself. Voicemail, I mentioned earlier, and I think the link was shared in the chat. No More campaign has a great campaign, digital campaign, paper campaign, specifically speaking to male survivors of sexual violence. So as you're thinking about how to engage the male survivors in your community, definitely check out the No More campaign. 1 in 6 has a campaign called One Blue Strain. So specifically, the statistic, if you're not familiar, 1 in 6 boys and men will experience some form of sexual violence or sexual abuse in their lifetime. So that's what 1 in 6 is. Definitely check out 1 in 6. They're a great resource, but they have this campaign called One Blue String. So check out their website. All of these are included in the link that was just shared in terms of engagement and resources. You'll find it there. And then finally, the Good Men Project. I wrote a number of blogs, and there's a number of writers that are male survivors about sexual violence or sexual abuse there. So definitely check out the Good Men Project. And then these are resources, specifically additional resources around training and technical assistance. Of course, our sister coalition. So if you're thinking about engaging boys and men around domestic violence, survivors of domestic violence, perpetrators of domestic violence and dating violence, etc., our sister coalition, the Texas Council on Family Violence, check them out. Just Attention International, No More, like I said, the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. Check out the podcast series about male survivors of sexual violence, bawa.net. SNAP is an organization that works with survivors and family members and friends of sexual abuse in the church, in ministries, etc. And then Forge, I mentioned earlier, that's working specifically with trans and non-binary folks, provide training and technical assistance. Check them out. All of these are included. I'm sure folks are familiar with these organizations. I do want to highlight the ones on the bottom: malesurvivor.org, 1in6.org, menhealing.org, and then of course you're the most important resource for male survivors. And so I want you to know and to remember that when male survivors, especially family members and friends and people that you love and live with, come to you and tell you that they've experienced some form of sexual violence or sexual abuse, you're the most important resource for them. So I want to encourage you to do all you can to support those individuals in your life. And then I want you to think about this. Just as you're leaving today, you're welcome to stick around. I'm going to be available. It's already noon. So what are your next steps? What are you going to do? What steps are you going to take to reach out to men in your community about their experiences of sexual violence? Right? Just to make a note of yourself, put it on a Post-it, put it up in your office, put it on your laptop, just as a reminder of what that next step is going to be. Incremental steps, baby steps, right? The little things that you can do, that you have control over as an individual advocate or just as an individual. If you don't control your organization's social media, if you're on social media, share this Michael story with your friends and your followers. So that's what we're talking about. And you have my contact information here. Feel free to reach me at ediaz.at.taasa.org. You can also reach me at 512-474-7190 at extension 135. You can also DM me on social media. And like if you're on social media, I encourage you to follow me, but I encourage you also to reach out to me. And if I can be of any support, encouragement, if I can share any additional resource, please let me know. Or if I can be any assistance, I am here to serve you in your organization. So thank you all so much for joining me this morning, or now this afternoon. Man, I didn't realize I could talk that fast, but thank you so much. So a lot of really good folks saying goodbye. So thank you so much for your comments. And So Joey said, as a male advocate, if other males in the work would like someone to talk with, please reach out. Thank you. Thank you for that, Joey. And Joey, we hope that you will consider joining the Texas Men Speak. We'd love for you to be a part of this project, and encourage you to reach out to me about that. But Joey shared his contact information. Thank you. A lot of thanks. Thank you so very much. You're all very welcome. I wish you luck, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Get some rest, unwind. If you have to go back to work, good luck with the rest of your workday. Thank you so much for joining our conference. Please make sure to complete the evaluation. I'm sure a link was shared in the chat. So please make sure to complete that. Your feedback is important to me. A lot of thank yous, a lot of really wonderful feedback. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. And feel free to stick around. I'm going to stick around for a little bit. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to open up your audio. Feel free to ask a question or to share a comment about anything that I've shared, or if you have a question for me. Alyssa, thank you. Kiara, thank you. Roger, thank you. Tim, thank you. Joey, and thank you, Madison and Shelley, for being just amazing moderators and success coaches, making this workshop a success. Oh, you're awesome. Who said that I'm awesome? Michelle, you're awesome, Michelle. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Alyssa. Thank you, Kiara, Roger. I think I gave you a shout out, Tim. All right. Yes, we'll see you in Houston, Sylvia. So again, there are still about like 20, 25 people. It's just like 30 people in the house. So if you have a question or comment, feel free to leave it in the chat, or open up your audio if you have a question or comment for me. I'll make myself available for a little bit longer here. But you can always reach out to me at ediazleon@TASA.org, or give me a call or shoot me a DM. Numbers are going down. There's still people in here. Please stop and say hi, open up your audio, ask, if you have a question or a comment. You can also private message me if you're not comfortable sharing it in the chat. So I got a question. I'm sure a lot of folks have heard the saying that hurt people, right? I actually explored this a little bit deeper because it was an interesting conversation. There's a organization called Mankind, the Mankind Project, and I was invited to be on their podcast, so the Mankind podcast. And I did a 2-part episode with them exploring the issue of male survivors and sexual violence. And this definitely the issue of men who have experienced sexual violence who go on to abuse others came up. That's not always true. It's not like being, like fictional stories of vampires, like you get bit, you become a vampire. That's not true for male survivors. Most male survivors don't go on to abuse. But it is definitely a part of a lot of perpetrators of sexual violence's experience, right? We have to acknowledge that that's part of the experience, that they they too are survivors, and that they deserve to heal, right, from their own experiences of sexual violence and abuse. And that's hard, you know. It definitely plays a part in terms of behavior, because sexual abuse doesn't just impact the perpetrator in terms of their own experiences of sexual abuse, but it also impacts the survivor. But for men who have experienced sexual abuse, there's all kinds of, and I encourage you to explore. I did a webinar on this issue just around engaging male survivors, but I go into some detail there about the impacts of sexual violence on boys and men, and in terms of both their physical health, their sexual health, their behavior, their mental health, etc. So it definitely has an impact in terms of our relationships, our sexual health, our sexual relationships, our sexual behavior, other forms of abuse that are not sexual, that can be physical or emotional, etc. Yeah, thank you so much for that, for sharing that with me in the private message. You know, I think when we think about perpetration, like anyone who has perpetrated any form of sexual violence or sexual abuse is, whether they've been publicly accused or accused within the criminal justice system, like holding that individual accountable is challenging. It's one of the challenges that most or not all survivors will face, especially male survivors of sexual violence and abuse. Holding that individual accountable is going to be difficult, because most male survivors that come forward later in life, there is no longer any sort of proof, both physical proof in terms of being able to conduct a SANE exam, or witnesses. I mean, the experience of sexual violence, sexual abuse is similar in some ways to female identified folks, but in this way, a lot of male survivors come forward later in life, and there's no way to hold that individual, that organization, that institution accountable, because the proof no longer exists. That's currently what's happening with the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts of America. We could use what's been happening in U.S. Olympics, etc. But yeah, I think the reality is that there's probably more than one victim of that individual. We know that perpetrators of sexual violence, they unfortunately have more than one victim over time. And yeah, accountability is hard. It's hard to find, and it's hard to find justice for survivors, especially for male survivors, for any survivor. Man, it's so hard. And I appreciate you sharing that with me as a private message. I mean, the fact that you know is an important step, right? That you're aware. One of the things that I find most effective, and I think specifically with male survivors, is to approach that, especially if they are also perpetrators of sexual violence or sexual abuse, is figuring out systems of accountability for yourself. Like what feels like, what sort of accountability can you provide? What kind of boundaries can you set with that individual who's committed that kind of abuse? But also approach about the healing aspect also. And I have found that the most effective way to do that is just to provide information and resources and allow them at their own pace or their own time to access that kind of support around healing. And as a result of that healing work, that if they're sincere about doing the healing work of their own experiences of sexual violence and sexual abuse, that it will eventually lead them into holding themselves accountable and working through systems that are for perpetrators of sexual violence or sexual abuse, while we have BIP programs, batterers intervention prevention programs for perpetrators of domestic violence and dating violence, we have a similar track, but it's primarily for the criminal justice system, individuals who've been convicted of sexual violence or sexual abuse. There's a similar mandated program that offenders have to go through around sexual violence and sexual abuse. What's different about that program is self-identified perpetrators can't just go, hey, I want to join this program. Like, I'm not aware of that. That's primarily for individuals, again, who have been prosecuted for the crime of sexual violence. But there's a number, there are a number of male survivors that I've encountered, that I've worked with, who themselves have perpetrated some form of sexual violence or sexual abuse. They're not proud of it, right? It's part of their own history, their own experience, right? But they were working through it, and it eventually comes out in their healing work. And so I hope that is helpful. I hope that as a result of doing the healing work, they will also address their abusive behavior. And it's okay. Like, this is like in terms of how you're feeling. I know folks can't see that, but I can see it in terms of it's okay to feel this way. It's especially when it's a family member or a loved one who has this experience. It can be really difficult. So I encourage you to take care of yourself and to get the support that you need, because we know that sexual violence and sexual abuse doesn't just affect the victim and survivor, but family members and friends. And so know that the centers are also there to support you, not just the victim or survivor, but for you. So these organizations like Men Healing, 1 in 6, malesurvivor.org have a lot of really wonderful resources for family members and friends of survivors. So, but feel free to reach out to me if I can be of any support. I don't know if there are folks still in the house, but yeah, I wanted to respect your confidentiality, but address it because I think it's a common question or issue. So you're welcome.
I definitely want to leave the space open if possible, just in case there are more conversations. So Emiliano, I'm going to make you host, and then just in case there are more conversations, if a couple people want to stay behind, or if people want to have a little bit more private conversation. Also, just a reminder, we have an advocate on call right now for the next 30 minutes. If anyone would like that or need that, you can let Emiliano or Shelly and I know really quick through private message, because we definitely want to provide support. And thank you, Emiliano, for all of that. And thank you to everyone who shared in the chat, even, all of those, private or public messages. We really, truly appreciate your bravery and your time. So thank you so much, everyone, for everything. I'm going to make Emiliano host. And we are going to, after that, dip out so that folks can stay behind if they would like to chat or need to, receive any type of support. So thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. So there's still a lot of folks in here. So any questions or comments, or you have that out, that's okay. I'm gonna stop the recording.